Welcome to a KeySmash Studios tutorial. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to create a collection area, as well as doing the handling for a character controller, so that way you can interact inside those areas, allowing us to fish, mine, and chop trees. This is part 4 of our collection game series. If you've missed any of the previous parts, I'll be sure to provide a link in the description to the playlist for this tutorial, so that way you can get caught up. As you're watching, if you find this video helpful, please remember to like and subscribe. The first thing we need to do is add an action mapping, so we're going to go up to Edit, Project Settings, go down to Input, and then go up to Action Mapping and add a new one, and I'm going to call this Interacting. And I'm going to map it to my F key. And now that that's done, we can go ahead and open up our My Character script. As I've said in the previous videos, you don't need our specific My Character script. You're just going to want to open up whatever your character controller is and add the code that we're going to be doing inside of there. So we're going to start inside of our header, and we're going to first add a function to our public section. It's going to be void. I'm going to call it canInteract. And we're going to end up calling this function inside of our collection area class, so we need to be able to communicate from that script to this one the type of collection area we're inside, and the way we're going to do that is through the properties of this function. The first one is going to be a boolean called able, and we're going to use this one to say whether we've entered the trigger box or exited the trigger box. The next one is going to be an F string called area, and this is so we can say the type of interaction that's going to be happening. We're going to have 3 different interaction areas in this video, one for chopping trees, one for fishing, and one for mining. The next one is going to be another F string, but this one is going to be called the item, and the reason I have it separate from the area is because the area is going to say the action that we're doing, for instance chopping, whereas the item is going to say the object that we're collecting, for instance logs. And then finally we're going to have an integer that says the amount we're collecting. And we touched on this in the item tutorial, but I have an amount with my item so that way I can have more than one of the item that I'm collecting. So that way if I'm chopping a tree, I don't just get 1 log from the tree, I can get multiple logs. Now we need 2 more functions, but these are going to be private. Both of these will be void. The first one I'm going to call interact. And this is the function that we'll end up calling whenever we click on our F button, and this will allow us to tell the character controller whether we should go ahead and interact with the area or determine if we're cutting the interaction short. The next function is going to be collect from area. And this is pretty self-explanatory, but we're going to be using this function to add the items of that area to our inventory on the completion of the interaction. And those are all of the functions, so now we can go ahead and do our properties. And there's actually going to be quite a few properties, so I'm going to do them in sections and explain them in the sections as I go. The first 2 properties we're going to create are going to both be booleans. The first one is going to be canInteract. And the next one, again a boolean, is going to be isInteracting. And the canInteract boolean is going to be used to say when we're inside of the trigger box, so that way we know that the player can click F now to interact. And our isInteracting boolean is going to be used when the player is inside an area and has clicked F, so that way we can control the player's movement so they can't move while they're interacting, as well as being used to determine when to call the collect from area function. The next 3 properties are going to be used to keep track of the properties of the area the player has entered. The first one is going to be an F string called interaction type. And this is going to be used to hold the value of the F string area passed through our canInteract function. The next property is going to be another F string. And this one's going to be called add type. And this is going to hold the value of the F string item passed through the canInteract function. And the next property is going to be an integer called addAmount. And this is going to be used to hold the amount value passed in again through the canInteract function. And now we have 2 properties left. Both of these properties are going to be used to keep track of how long we've been interacting with an area, so that way we know when to call the collect area function. Both of these are going to be floats. The first one is going to be called counter. And the second one is going to be called delay. Counter will be used to keep track of how much time has passed since we've started interacting, and delay will be used to keep track of if enough time has passed, and then counter will be compared to delay to determine if enough time has passed and if we can call the collect from area function. And that's all we'll be doing inside the header, so we can go ahead and go over to the CPP. And the first thing we're going to do inside here is give those values a default. So can interact is going to be false, as we're not going to be able to interact when the game begins. The same is going to go for is interacting, as obviously when the game starts we won't be in the middle of interacting with things. And then we're going to give the equivalent of a bunch of empty values to the 3 properties that we're using to keep track of the type of area we're currently in. So interaction type is going to equal null. Add type is also going to equal null. And then add amount will equal 0. And then with our counter that we'll end up using to see how much time has passed, we want this defaulted to 0. And then delay we're going to set whenever we've interacted with an area, so we're just going to default this to 0 as well. And now we can go ahead and move on to our input components. We need a way to take the action mapping that we created inside our project settings and bind it to a function. And so we'll do that here as we did in the previous one with our inventory with pickup and iterate. And so we need to do input component. And this one is going to be bind action. And then we need the mapping name, which is what we gave it inside the project settings, and that was interacting. And then we need the key event, in other words, when is this action being called? And I want it to be called whenever I press, so we're going to do IE pressed. We want to say what we're binding it to, which is this. And then finally the function that we want it to call whenever this button is pressed. So you need to do my character, and then the function is interact. And so to reiterate, what this line of code is doing is taking the mapping of interacting, binding it to the function of interact, and then calling that function of interact anytime the F button is pressed. And now that we have that, we can go ahead and create our functions. And so the first one I'm going to do is going to be can interact. So void my character, can interact. And this had 4 parameters: bool able, f-string area, f-string item, and int amount. And then inside this, all we want to do is take the parameters that are being sent through this function and assign them to our variables inside this class. And so the variables for this class are can interact, and we want this to equal the value of able that's passed. And then we want interaction type to hold the value of area, add type to hold the value of item, and finally add amount to hold the value of amount. And I misspelled type. There we go. And then I'm also going to add an on-screen debug message. This isn't needed and I'll eventually remove it, but I just want you to be able to see things as they happen. So whenever this function is called, I want you to see it being called. And so I'm going to do gengine add on-screen debug message. And then I'm going to give it some parameters. And for the text, I'm just going to say can interact. And again, this is not needed. The only reason I'm doing this is so you can see the code working on the screen. Later on when we have animations and UI, you'll be able to see it more clearly. Right now, you won't be able to see any of that happening as we don't really have a front end to this code. And so I just want this message to be debugged onto the screen so that way you can see the code working. And that's all we're doing for this function, so we can go ahead and create the interact function. So this is also void my character. And it's called interact. Again, this function is called when the user presses the F button, and so we want to make sure that when they press the F button that they're actually inside of an area that they can interact in. So we're going to do an if statement, and inside this if statement we're going to check that interaction type is not null. And this tells us that we've entered an interaction area where we can add something to the inventory. And then we also want to check can interact, as well as checking that we're not already currently interacting. And the reason we want to make sure that we're not currently interacting is because we don't want to restart the whole interaction process if the player clicks F again while interacting. And I'm also going to make it to where if they press F while interacting, they stop the interaction. And so we're going to use this to determine whether they're already interacting and want to stop, or if they're not interacting and want to start. So after we've determined that all three of those statements are true, we're going to set is interacting to true, as our player will be saying that they want to start the interaction. We're going to set our counter to equal 0 because we want our player to interact with an area for a certain amount of time before the item is collected. And if they've already collected an item and we don't restart the counter, then they'll just collect it right away. And then we're going to go ahead and set our delay to equal 3. I'm doing this for time's sake. You can do it as long as you'd like, as short as you'd like, or even have an if state inside this that checks the type of interaction and then set the delay accordingly. Maybe you want tree chopping to take 10 seconds and mining to take 15. You'd be able to do that inside of an if statement that checks the interaction type and then setting the delay to the corresponding values. And then finally, I'm going to do another on-screen debug message. Again, this is optional and I'll eventually remove it once we get to UI, but I'm just going to copy paste it in, and then I'm going to say is interacting so that way we can see the code happening while we're in the scene. And then, like I said, I also want to be able to determine if the player is trying to stop interacting, and so we're going to need an else if statement. And it's going to be pretty similar. We're going to still have the interaction type not equaling null, and can interact still being true, but this time we want is interacting to be true. And this is saying this something similar to the if statement above. I can interact, but in this case I've already been interacting and I want to stop. And so all we have to do for that is say is interacting equals false. And then once again, I'm going to add another debug message just so we can see the code happening in the scene. And this time I'm going to say exited interact. And that's everything for the interact function. So now we can go ahead and create our final function, which is collect from area. Again, it's void aMyCharacter, and then this one collect from area. And inside this, we're actually going to be checking if our inventory is not null. If you followed the previous video, we worked on the inventory inside of that, and so we have a reference to that inventory inside of this script, and we need to make sure that it exists, so that way we don't get any null errors. The way we do that is just if inventory, and after we've established that the inventory isn't null, we also want to make sure that our interaction type is not null. And if both of those statements are true, in other words, we're inside an area where we can interact and our inventory exists for items to be added to, we can go ahead and call on our inventory reference and call the add item function. And this function has two parameters, the type of item and the amount of item, so we need to make sure to add in those. So ours is add type, and then add amount. To reiterate, what this line is doing is calling on our pointer to inventory, calling its function of add item, and then taking the add type and the add amount that were assigned inside the can interact and adding those to our inventory. And then after this, we'll want to say is interacting is false, as we'll have completed the interaction. And then again, I'm going to add this debug message and just say finished interaction so we can see it all happening in the scene. That's all of the functions, but there's actually still two things we need to do. We need to check on when to call this collect from area function, and we're going to do that inside of tick. And so we want to make sure first that we are currently interacting, because we don't want to be adding items if we're not interacting to collect the item. And then once we've determined that we are inside an area and interacting with it, we want to take our counter and add to it delta time. Delta time is the seconds passed since the previous frame, and so by adding this value to our counter, we're able to keep track of the seconds passing so that way we can determine when it's been long enough to call on that function. And the way we do that is by checking if the counter is greater than or equal to the delay. And again, our delay was 3, so this is saying has counter reached 3 seconds or above, and if it has, then we can go ahead and call on collect from area. And then another thing I'm going to do is make it to where the player can't move if they're currently interacting. And the way I'm going to do that is by adding a check for not is interacting. And so this way, if I am interacting, it doesn't let me move away from the thing I'm interacting with. So I'm just going to actually copy this and just paste it on both of my move functions and both of my rotation functions. And that's all of the code for the My Character script, so I'm going to go ahead and save. And we're going to compile, and after I've compiled and make sure that there's no initial errors, I'm going to go ahead and create a TriggerBox script that we're going to be using for our collection areas. And so now that it compiled, we'll go ahead and create the new C++ class. You're going to want to go to Show All Classes, type in Trigger, we're going to do TriggerBox, and I'm going to name it Interaction Area, and then we're going to create class. And now that the class is created, the first thing we want to do is add some includes. The first one is going to be My Character, as we're going to need to call that canInteract function inside of this class. And the next one is going to be a Game Framework, actor.h. So that way we can check the actors that the box has interacted with. From there, we need to add some general stuff that's defaulted in classes like a character and a actor, but isn't for whatever reason inside a trigger box. So we want to create a protected, and then this is just going to have the virtual void begin play with override. And then we want to do a public, and this is going to have the constructor. In our case, it's going to be a interaction area. And now that we've added those basics that are normally defaulted in the other scripts, we can go ahead and create what's going to be unique for this script. And so first we want functions, so we're going to do uFunction. And I'm going to call this one void enter area. And because I'm going to add this as a dynamic to the onActor begin overlap, I need 2 parameters. The first one is class AAActor, overlapped actor. And the second one is, again, class AAActor, other actor. And just to make sure this part's clear, if you're creating a function that you want to add as a dynamic to the onActor begin overlap function, you need it to, 1, be a uFunction, and then you need it to have these 2 parameters. You can call the function whatever you'd like, but you need these 2 parameters and you need it to be a uFunction. Otherwise, you'll end up having errors when you try to add it as a dynamic later in the CPP. And now we want to do the same thing, but for onExit, so uFunction void exit area, and it's going to have the same parameters of a class AAActor, overlapped actor, and class AActor, other actor. And just as with above, again, you can name the function whatever you would like. It doesn't have to be exit area, but you do need these 2 parameters and you need it to be a uFunction. And I left out the in here. But now we can go ahead and create our properties. We're going to have 3 properties. They're going to be similar to the ones from My Character. We need 1 for the area, 1 for the item, and 1 for the item amount. And so we can go ahead and start on those, and we actually want these to be edit anywhere. And the reason these will be edit anywhere is so that we can change the value of the property inside the details panel in the engine whenever we add the object to the scene. So the first one is going to be fstring area type, And then again, uProperty, edit anywhere. And this one is also going to be f-string, but will be area item. And then for the final one, uProperty, edit anywhere. But this one is an integer, and it's going to be area amount. And that's everything for the header, so we can go ahead and open up the CPP for it. And just like the header, we're going to need to add some code that's normally defaulted to things like a actor and a character. So the first thing is going to be the constructor. Again, this is a interaction area. And then it's a interaction area. And then inside the constructor is where we want to add our dynamics for when we begin our overlap and exit our overlap. We're going to do on actor begin overlap dot add dynamic. And then we want to add the dynamic to this. And the function that we want for this is a interaction area enter area. And then we're going to do the same for on end. So on actor end overlap dot add dynamic, adding it to this. And then this time the function is a interaction area exit area. And what these two lines are doing are taking the given function and calling it either on begin or end overlap. And so now that we've done that, we can go ahead and also add our begin play. Again, begin play is normally defaulted, but for whatever reason, it's not inside a trigger box. So you're going to do void a interaction area begin play. And then inside it, we just want the super of begin play. And now that that's done, we can move on to our functions. So void interaction area, enter area. And again, the parameters were class a actor, overlapped actor, and class a actor, other actor. And inside this, the first thing we want to do is make sure that other actor exists, that we have actually overlapped something, so other actor. And we want to make sure that other actor does not equal this. In other words, we haven't overlapped with ourselves. And after we've done that, we now want to check that other actor is in fact a character. Sorry, this needs to be a interaction area. Okay. And now that we've done that, we want to make sure that other actor is in fact our character. And so the way we're going to do that is by taking the aMyCharacter class, creating a pointer for it, and then attempting to cast to it. So we want to do cast aMyCharacter, and the thing we're attempting to cast is other actor. And what the casting does is takes other actor, checks to see if it's of aMyCharacter class, and if it is, then it assigns that other actor to the character pointer of aMyCharacter. And so the way to check to see if it's successfully casted is through an if statement with just character inside it, and this will tell us if it's casted, because if it's null, it won't go inside the if statement. So once we're sure that it's successfully casted, we want to go ahead and take our character pointer and call canInteract, and then pass in our values. So once we've entered the area, we know that we are able to interact. That was our first parameter, so we'll put true there. And then we want to take in the area type, followed by the area item, and finally the area amount. And that's all of the code that's inside our enter area function. So now we can go ahead and do the same for our exit area. So void a interaction area, exit area, and it will be the same parameters, class a actor, overlapped actor, and class a actor, other actor. And then we want to do the same first check as the enter area. We want to make sure that there is another actor that is actually exiting this. And if there is, then we want to make sure that that other actor is not in fact this actor. And after we've checked that, we want to do the same casting. So we want to check if the other actor is of my character class. And we do that the same way by creating a pointer for a my character and casting the class of a my character to the other actor that's passed in as a parameter of this function. And then we do the same thing. We make sure that the character is successfully casted and isn't null. And if it's not, then we take our character and call the function canInteract. Except this time we pass a false because we're no longer able to interact. We've exited an interaction area. And all of the parameters are now going to be null. You want to make sure the last one is a 0, not literally null, because it's an integer and not a string. But that's all of the code that we'll be doing for the interaction area class, so you can go ahead and save and go back to the scene and compile. And while this compiles, I'm going to go ahead and make these things bigger so we can add all of the interaction areas onto the scene. Whoops. So we'll just do that and then wait for it to finish compiling. So now that the compile has completed, I'm going to go ahead and drag in these areas. And we'll just make one of each, so we'll call this one fish. That will be the type, that's the action you're doing, is fishing. And then the item is also fish in this case, and the area amount is just going to be 1. And then we'll make another. This one is going to be chop for the area, logs for the area item, and then I'll make it 5 that you collect after you've chopped down a tree. And then for the final one, this is going to be a mine area. You collect stone and you'll get 10 after you're done interacting. And I'm just going to move these so I can more easily determine if I've actually crossed into them while we still haven't created our scene. I'm just going to stick a chair next to this one and a chair next to this one. And then we can go ahead and play. And now if I go over to this area, it says can interact. If I press F, it is interacting, and then after the 3 seconds, you can see it says finished interaction. And if I scroll in my inventory, you can see that I now have 5 logs. So I'll just go ahead and do the other ones, so that way you can see it happening again. Can interact, is interacting, finished interaction, and then you can see I have 1 fish. So over in the final one, can interact, is interacting, finished interaction, and now in my final space I had those 10 stones. So as a recap, we used a trigger box to create an interaction area that has properties that we can change inside our details panel so that way we can have different kinds of areas in our scene. We also did handling for our characters so that way we could properly interact with those scenes and be able to collect items from them. As always, I hope this video was helpful. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave them in the comments, or you can join our Discord and ask them there. We do videos here every Wednesday and Saturday, but we also stream games on Twitch Monday through Wednesday, so if that would interest you, be sure to check it out. On top of that, we've created a game in the Google Play Store called Blast Off, and we have an asset pack of kids' toys on the Unity store. If any of those things interest you or you'd like to support us in any of those ways, I'll provide links in the description below for all of those things. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you next time.